Hello, Keyforgers. Welcome back to Phlox'em. We are here with just kind of a recap of some KFC stuff, but specifically taking a look at our Draconian Measures deck. So if you saw or were at Keyforge Celebration, you know that there were Draconian Measures decks given out for one of the evening events. I got mine here. I'll say right off the bat, I don't think this deck is a great representation of the set. It is a very creature heavy deck, which means the way it played was pretty slow, pretty grindy. I don't think it's terrible in that sense, but compared to other stuff I saw, it just felt like it had a lot of turns where I was just trying to play creatures, and if they survived, I could do stuff, and if they didn't, I was kind of out of luck. So, not like the most amazing example. We'll talk about exactly kind of what other stuff I saw from the set, but just wanted to go through this deck, show you kind of what we're seeing, some of the things we're seeing, because you can see a lot of spoiler cards individually, but until you kind of see them with the other cards in the set in a deck, it's a little bit hard to really know exactly what they're doing. So this one is Hopalobe, the Governor of Subterfuge, and it's going to be Ekwidon, Unfathomable, and Geistoid. Interesting house combination there. Definitely a GR throwback, but I'll say the deck does not quite feel like GR. So we're going to start off with our Ekwidon here, and we've got our first new card, which is the Bypass Burglar. It's going to be a lot of in and out here, but I want to make sure these cards are properly shown. This is a 2-power Ekwidon creature with Entrench. While Bypass Burglar is exhausted, each of its neighbors gain action, steal 1, deal 1 damage to this creature. Now, very important to note there, the wording on that is that the creatures next to it are gaining that full text, which includes the deal 1 to a creature. When this creature's neighbors, when Bypass Burglar's neighbors are using this action, they're not dealing the damage to Bypass Burglar, they're dealing it to themselves. So essentially what you're doing is you're making your neighbors, while this is exhausted, into Gemcoat Vendors, which already has this action ability where they steal 1, deal 1 damage to themselves. A really important thing, just a lot of as we were kind of playing Draconian Measures, learning about Entrench, kind of just seeing it in action, one of the really important things is that this creature, if you put it in the middle of other Ekwidon creatures, there's no real reason to entrench it at the end of your turn to keep it exhausted, because at the start of your turn, if it's still alive, you just use it first, either to reap or break elusive or whatever, and then its 2 neighbors are going to have that effect anyways. So really that entrench ability is a lot more for if you're putting this next to creatures from other houses that you're planning on maybe using the next turn, but you might be kind of, you know, showing your opponent what you're doing there. But still not too bad of a card. Again, ability to use your creatures to steal instead of reap. Not bad if you're actually able to kind of use your board over and over. These can get a lot of value. Again, if you are calling Ekwidon using several creatures from Ekwidon, this being able to reap and then give its neighbors the ability to steal is not bad. However, we have 3 of these, which is fun. This one's got the capture pip on it, and then this one has the +1 power counter. So this is, +1 power pip. You can get it on there. So if you haven't seen what those look like yet, that's what they look like. They are sort of the red inside with the white text and then the white border. A little bit, I'm trying to remember if the actual tokens are that or if they're the other way, because it looks more like a damage, almost like the damage counters that you get from the cardboard are sort of the red with the white text, but it's not too hard to see what it's doing because since it has the plus on there, but that's what those are going to look like. Nice to have on this creature, again, if you want us to survive for a turn, so you can actually get it. The other trick is, again, with this Entrench, when you play a creature from your hand, it's coming in exhausted. So if you already have another ready Ekwidon creature with this, as soon as you play this, it is exhausted, so its neighbors have that effect. So you can just action to steal 1 with this one as soon as you play it. So there's a lot of kind of thinking about how these creatures, without having to actually use the Entrench ability, can still get those while this creature is exhausted effects to really make the most use out of them. I think that's kind of an interesting part of this, is just like when you're playing cards, as you're keeping them ready and then using them on your turn, you're still going to get those effects. It's really the ones you want to look for are the at the start of your turn or end of your turn sort of effects that you're going to get on some of the other Entrench creatures. 3 of them is pretty fun. If you have them all next to each other, you can kind of exhaust 1, then they both are getting the steal, or yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of chain it off a little bit to get some extra steal, and then they're all going to be dealing those little damages to each other. They will die pretty fast if they're doing that to themselves, but again, if you're stealing Amber, it's worth losing the creatures. Gemcoat Vendor, we've seen this one plenty before. Coming back again, a little bit awkward to have this in the same house or same set as a creature that basically gives its same effect. So if you put these next to each other, exhausting this does not change this at all because your action effect, sorry, I'm gonna see if I can fix that glare a little bit. Your action effect is essentially the same thing, and actions don't stack, so you don't really get to steal two or anything off of having these next to each other. So a little bit of interesting mechanics there and how that works, but we'll keep going. Next one, we've got Golden Dagger. This is after Reap, 3 power creature. After Reap, deal 3 damage to a creature. If this damage destroys that creature, its owner gains 1. So kind of similar to like a Seeker Needle, only it's going to be giving the owner, not always you, the amber if the creature is destroyed. Does deal more damage though, so you can use this as creature control, but it's going to be giving your opponent amber, which is a little bit tough, but if they've got one of those nasty entrench creatures or elusive creatures that you just have to get rid of, this can do that. Fun thing with this guy though, if he hits himself, you're just reaping for 2 amber basically, and then he destroys himself. So not too bad. One of the things you're going to see, I think, in this set a lot is a lot of after reap, after fight effects. It really seemed like they dialed back on the play effects quite a bit in this set. As far as on creatures, there's a lot of after reap, after fight, and then kind of action effects or these sort of static entrench effects versus creatures doing stuff on play. So there's a lot of hoping your stuff survives on the board rather than it kind of having that immediate impact. All right, first action we're getting into here is Hot Bunk. This one's got the Amber Pip on it there naturally, and then a +1 power counter. Sorry, we're still trying to... There we go. This is still a common action, and it's play, exhaust a creature. If you do, ready a creature. Pretty fun one. I think in Sealed especially, this is a card that's going to do a lot just because the way that it works, the way that it's worded, and really even how you kind of see the interactions. Come on, camera. There we go. How interactions are going between your board and your opponent's board is you might actually use this to ready one of your opponent's entrench creatures. So if they have some that have some of these really good static effects, an example is a Skyborn creature that gives you amber for each exhausted Skyborn creature on the flanks. That can be a lot of amber at the start of turn that could be giving your opponent a key. If you don't have a way to kill it, this can be kind of the next best thing of at least removing its exhaustion, making it ready so that they're not getting that entrench ability at the start of their turn. Otherwise, this is basically just creature control plus some extra usability on your creatures if you exhaust one of your opponent's creatures and then use it to ready one of yours. Being able to ready creatures is always good, especially when we have all of these steal effects. Very nice there, and then the extra +1 power pip goes really well with the bypass burglars to try and make them a little bit more survivable. Again, common action, you're going to see it a lot. I think it's going to be really, really nice to have in multiple in Sealed, just for that utility, and again, having all these reap effects and actions and stuff makes that being able to ready creatures very, very nice, but it has that dual utility of also readying your opponent's entrenched creatures. Another common action we're going to see here is Now and Later. This one does not have a native pip on it, but it's got a play effect. Return a creature to its owner's hand and archive a card. Pretty good. So some creature control and archiving. If you're overwhelmed, repeat the preceding effect. So this is basically 2 bounces and 2 archives if you're overwhelmed. But what's really fun about this is there's so many different things you can do with it. Very, very high utility card because you can hit your own creature on the first one to make yourself overwhelmed, maybe, and then you archive a card, and then you get to hit one of your opponent's creatures just to get rid of a problem creature from the board. Maybe they have some captured amber or something, and then you get a second archive. You can hit 2 of your own creatures if you have some cool play effects. There's all kinds of things you can do with this that are really nice, and I really like the sequencing here is you return a card to its owner's hand and then archive. So if you have something, I don't know what all is in this set as far as play effects, but if you have a creature with a really good play effect in a different house from Ekwidon, it's not going to clog up your hand because you get to bounce it back to your hand, and then you can immediately archive it if you want to. So think about, like, I would say Sandworm, but Sandworm would be a creature in Ekwidon, so that doesn't really make sense. But those kind of things where you kind of, it's very, very high utility card. Again, really, really like the actions we've seen so far from Ekwidon, having lots of lots of different ways you can use them to interact with the game. And again, in sealed especially, I think both of these are very, very solid. This giving you some creature control and some efficiency, or setting up those combos. Permanent record coming back from GR. This is going to be exhaust a friendly creature. If you do, steal 2. Really interesting one to have alongside a set that is very focused on the entrenches and stuff. So like all kinds of things you can do with this, where if you already have a creature with an entrench effect, but it's ready, you can use this to exhaust it, steal 2, then also have your entrench effect at the start of, or with its like neighbors or whatever. But there are going to be times where you're going to entrench, like you only have 2 creatures on the board or whatever. You entrench both of them at the end of your turn, then you draw into this, and you're just like, oh, I have creatures on the board. They survived my opponent's turn, and I still can't steal because this requires me to have a ready creature. So it's interesting again, and that's where, like, even when you're playing sealed, if you're going up against Ekwidon, you might want to use this more to exhaust your opponent's creatures to avoid permanent record, but you can also use this if you have it yourself to ready your creatures. So again, there's lots of decisions that I think is, as we play this more, could turn into a lot of really fun sort of puzzles when you're looking at your board, you're looking at your opponent's board, trying to figure out like what needs to be exhausted, what needs to be destroyed, all these different things to try and really make the most out of turns, out of sort of all these little incremental things like what to exhaust and whatnot. All right, we've got one of our custom art cards. This is Captain Gale's card, if you haven't seen that art yet. Really, really fun sort of sandbox Geistoid human there with his little baby sandworm, some Dune vibes and stuff like that. But this is CRISPR Rolled. 4 power, 1 armor. After fight, take control of an enemy artifact. So looking back at Amber Skies, we had a couple of these sort of 3-ish power creatures with some armor and stuff that have these after fight or after reap effects that are dealing with artifacts. Have that again here with just a solid body. The 4 power, 1 armor is going to survive, especially against some of the creature control we're going to see in this set. And then being able to just take an enemy artifact, good. It doesn't change the house of it or anything, so you're not necessarily always getting sort of that like take it, use it value, unless it's like an Omni or whatever. But I mean, artifacts are just so strong these days. There's so many different things you can get out of this. Just to take it away from your opponent can be very valuable. So we got 2 of those in this deck. Again, pretty survivable too with that 1 armor. So if you put this next to your bypass burglars or whatever, you have that chance of just getting stealing. If your opponent doesn't have any artifacts to take, you can just steal Amber with them instead, right? They have that utility with the synergy of the battle line here. All right, one of our uncommons, CRISPR Rolled, by the way, also an uncommon, so you're not going to see that all the time, so having 2 of those is pretty fun if I'm playing against artifacts. We got a cool one here. This is Wasp Scream. I believe this was spoiled in the Game Found. I'm not 100% sure. It's got Entrench on there and Poison 2 power. At the start of your turn, if Wasp Scream is exhausted, take control of an enemy creature. So this is one of those ones where, and I think I actually did this in one of my matches, if your opponent has a Wasp Scream down and you don't have a way to kill it, this hot bunk might actually just let you get around it by actually readying your opponent's Wasp Scream so it doesn't get its entrench ability at the start of the turn. So that's where, again, kind of in sealed, you're going to see all sorts of these little decisions to try and get sort of incremental advantage over your opponent. But pretty solid ability here. Very, very tricky. It really depends on the game state. So we saw Pied Viper in Prophetic Visions being a creature that can also steal your opponent's creatures if they reap while you are overwhelmed, basically. Most of the time we see people actually discarding that card because it is actually actively bad when your opponent gets to choose which creature they're giving you. This one is different because it's at the start of your turn, so you as the active player get to choose which creature you're taking. So if your opponent loads up 1 creature with a bunch of amber and they have a couple others, you're not forced to take the one with all the amber. Now, the trick is, if your opponent sees this on the board, knows you have to steal one at the start of your turn because it's exhausted, they might kill off their other creatures, load that one up with amber, and then you're basically forced to take all that amber over. So it's still a little bit of a dangerous card. I think it takes a lot more work for your opponent to turn it against you, and if they don't, I think it can be a lot more scary because you can grab other creatures with entrench effects. You can grab, things that are reducing key cost because it's the start of turn. One of the cards I actually spoiled, the dragon, I can't remember the name, it reduces your key cost. So if you're taking it at the start of your turn and you have like 5 amber and that card comes over and you reduce your key cost by 1, you might just forge and your opponent might have actually had no way of getting around that. So I think this is still a scary one. The poison as well just makes this a little nuke if you need to kill something big. So not bad, especially to see at uncommon. All right, last one. This is Amber Sky's card, giving us some house pips, game changer, coming back to give everything action, steal 1. So lots of steal in this Ekwidon pod. Obviously, having the game changer down makes all of these guys entrench effects and stuff not really useful, makes the gem coat basically just do the same thing without having to damage itself. But that does mean anytime you have a couple ready Ekwidon creatures on the board, even if it's just like 2, if you're going into that house and playing a couple cards, there's a pretty good chance you're going to make it so that your board is able to steal, whether it's permanent record, dropping a bypass burglar next to, one of these CRISPR rolled, whatever. There's a pretty decent chance you're going to get some of that action stealing going on to try and, reduce your opponent's amber, get yourself ahead on that race. But overall, still a pretty creature dependent house, right? These bypass burglars are decent if they survive a turn, but they're pretty small. They're going to die to a lot of things, especially stuff we're seeing in PV. CRISPR rolled pretty situational. If you don't have bypass burglars, the game changer to give him that extra steal, he's basically just a vanilla creature if your opponent doesn't have artifacts. Still 4 power, 1 armor isn't too bad for that. But again, I really, really like the actions that we get to see in common here. I think they make for really, really interesting decisions in sealed especially. And then a few of these entrench effects are pretty fun. So again, this house I would say is the one that probably did the most for me just to keep me in games when it was so creature dependent. Having 26 creatures in this deck, being able to use them to steal is very, very good. But again, you can see in here, no play effects on these creatures. Everything needs to sit on the board for a turn before it can really do much, unless you use like Hot Bunk to ready it or something like that. Okay, let's get into our next house, and this is going to be Geistoid. I'll say off the bat, Geistoid feels pretty different from other sets, and again, this might just be my deck is feeling a little bit rough. Feels like a lot of creatures doing a lot of work to do stuff that older creatures did more easily, but we'll go ahead and go through here and just see what we put together. So our first one is Fading Apparition. Come on. So fading, even my camera can't pick it up. 3 power with Entrench. While Fading Apparition is exhausted, any amber you would gain by reaping may be taken from among friendly creatures instead of the common supply. On the surface, this is a fine ability, right? If this guy's exhausted, and again, with entrench abilities, with these things, while it's exhausted, that means it is in effect as soon as you play the card, if you have other ready creatures on the board. So like, that's one thing you always have to take into account with these while this is exhausted creatures, is that when you play them, they are exhausted. So anything you already have ready that turn can use that effect. Entrench just allows you to keep them exhausted for your next turn as well. So if you have a different house, you want to keep it exhausted so that they're going to be able to reap and get the same effect. This effect, however, is, it's not bad, right? If you have captured amber, whatever, exalted amber, this gives you a way to get rid of it and put it in your pool. That's never a bad thing. What's frustrating about this is we had Janiri in Amber Skies, which enhanced for, I believe, 2 capture pips, gave this effect without them losing the reap. So this one replaces where you get the amber from with the amber that you would take off of a creature. Whereas Janiri, as far as I remember, is after reap, move 1 amber from a creature to your pool. Which is just basically double as good as this card is. That was at uncommon, this one's at common, so obviously with a little bit of a difference there in the rarity, you're going to see this one more often. But I also think Amber Skies just had a lot more capture than what I've seen so far from this Geistoid house. Again, my deck might be an exception, not the rule. It's still a fine card, but it does make me sad that it seems like sort of a downgrade to a card we saw in Amber Skies that I actually really liked. Janiri was a really good one. Definitely a witch sort of creature. All right, next one is our 2 power Hammersmith, which I believe is, I'm not 100% sure if this is named after the community member Hammersmith, but that is a name of a community member, so maybe this is a Be hard to say this is a custom art because it just looks like a ghost. After Reap, deal 2 damage to a creature. If this damage destroys that creature, give a friendly creature 2+1 power counters. So, I mean, 2 damage to a creature. That's fine. It's on creature control. And if it kills the thing, you get to do some +1 power counters. But at common, if you get a deck with 2 or 3 of these, so mine has 2 here, 2 power, no elusive, has to survive on board to do something that's not really gaining you much amber, putting more power counters on a creature that might already be dying to a gateway the next turn. It's hard for me to justify this one as not like a play fight or something. If it's play fight, you can play it, hit itself, give something else +2 power. Even that is still not like that impressive. If they survive, it's fine. But again, we had something like Wellstring in Amber Skies, which was after fight and after Reap at common, and that's dealing 3 power. You don't get the plus power counters afterwards, but the synergies with the power counters, I've not seen a ton of those yet, and that just might be the houses I have don't synergize as much with them. Kind of an underwhelming common there, especially to have 2 of them. The House Pip is nice, right? Anything that's got a Reap effect that's going to be doing creature control or whatever, getting House Pips on there is good. Getting that in Geistoid means we can also be playing that along with, or using that along with some of these steel effects. But yeah, for a common, not the most impressive there. Next one, we've got Haunting Measures. Come on. This is Amber Pip. Discard the top 6 cards of your deck. You may put a non-Geistoid card discarded this way into your hand. I need to see more Geistoid in this set because mine just feels really frustrating. A lot of the things I see, I can see some potential with this one, especially if it gets House Pips on it. But the reality is, if you're just using this on any given turn, you're discarding 6 cards, which could be helping you get haunted, but I have seen almost no haunted effects in Geistoid yet. So not sure that that's as useful anymore. But basically, you're putting a non-Geistoid card in your hand, which means you can't play it this turn, that you're doing this effect. And you're basically telling your opponent what house you want to go into next turn or what answers you might have. If you grab some kind of big amber control piece or whatever, they might switch to a more disruptive turn. They might just slow roll, try to get board control because they know you have that card. Is a very interesting card. I haven't seen what it goes well with outside of if you get a House Pip on this, it's very nice because you basically get to search the top 6 cards of your deck for a card you can use that turn, versus this one that is sort of just putting a card in your hand that you have to wait a whole turn to use. Might get randomly discarded before then anyways. It's an interesting one. It does have the Amber Pip on there, which is fine. All right, next one is Old Switcheroo. This one you're going to see a lot of because it's not bad. This is going to be 2 capture enhances, so there's a little bit of our capture that we're wanting with like the fading apparition and stuff as well. But this one says play a friendly creature captures 1, give control of that creature to your opponent. So it's like a little mini exile, but that automatically gives you at least 1 capture with it. I think this is going to be one of those cards where just like people are going to find them with 1 or 2 capture enhances on it. They're going to find a couple other cards that do some good capture or are really hard to kill. And again, at common, they might have 2 or 3 of these. You're just going to get Amber getting shipped across all the time, which is fine. I think this is a very decent version of this. The problem is you always have to give them a creature. And if that's your only creature, it can be a discard. If you don't have any creatures, it's not giving you any value, so no Amber Pip on it or anything. But again, I think it's not a bad card. Again, you'll probably see this a lot in Sealed as a fairly solid way of basically stealing Amber, except what probably happens is you play this and then they just play it and give it right back to you because this is again a common card, so you might get that Amber shipped around a lot. All right, next one we've got Spiky Jeff. Goof. 4 power, no armor, taunt if you are overwhelmed. Spiky Jeff. Wow, I'm already saying it wrong. Spiky Jeff gains hazardous 2 and then scrap, deal 2 damage to a creature. This is our first scrap effect we've seen. Deal 2 damage to a creature is kind of fine. Again, if you've got these guys on the board as well, you can kind of chain this into killing some bigger creatures. Taunt is not bad, again, for some of these smaller creatures. Not bad to have that taunt. The hazardous feels not super impactful against most things. A lot of like the bigger creatures that are going to be fighting are going to have armor anyways, so that hazardous is not doing a whole lot. But you know, sometimes it's just enough of what you need to keep something safe. The scrap effect is nice. If you old switcheroo one of these hammersmiths, you can immediately discard this to kill it, just to get that captured stolen amber essentially. So it's not terrible, but I think 3 or 4 damage on that scrap effect would have been justifiable. The 2 damage feels pretty rough compared to like what we have in Untamed and GR. The spore, Witch of the Spore, which did 3 damage on the scrap effect, and in that set we have a lot more ways to discard. I don't know if I've seen hardly any discard pips in this set so far. I think there are some, but not nearly as many as we would have seen there, so you're not going to be triggering scrap effects as often. But another 4 power body there with some taunt to try and protect stuff. Wraith Construct. This is one that I want to do better than it did. Oops. 4 power, no armor. At the start of your turn, discard a card from your hand. I really like the idea of it. Again, you have scrap effect here, but this is in the same house. So I guess if you draw this and then you go into a different house, you still get the discard here. I need to see more synergy with this, I think. And again, it might be in other decks, just not in mine so much. I really like the idea, though, of having this sort of different way of doing efficiency, right? Like we've had things like, what is it? Greater Oxtet, right? Where you're kind of purging a card from hand so that you can draw more. You have things like Mother, which are obviously just drawing you an extra card. This is sort of giving you efficiency in another new way, where at the start of your turn, you get to just ditch the cards that you don't want to be in hand. The bad thing about this is if you're playing against PV, you might discard the cards that are not of the house you want to play, and then you might get a prophecy that discards the rest of your cards, and then you just actually have no hand left. So I think there's a world where this can backfire if your opponent has more like random discards or whatever that are happening, because this is forced. You have to discard. So even if your opponent hits you with a rage reset or whatever, you still have to discard another card with this on the board. I have 2 of those, so if I have both of these down at the same time, I think it could be really fun. If my opponent's not running Disruption, I get a lot of extra efficiency. If they are, this card is just actively hurting me, I think, at that point. Boiler coming back from GR. Again, another scrap effect there to go with the Wraith Constructs. Not bad. 1 damage to all the creatures or the Destroyed effect. Honestly, I put this on the board when I was playing because you can see so far our board control is pretty minimal, so having that extra deal 6 to enemy flank creatures on the board as a threat was very useful. All right, so we've got one of our World Champion designed cards here, and it looks like a World Champion card. This is Damater. 2 power Geistoid creature, play, draw 3 cards, discard 2 cards, archive a card. Nothing bad about this card. It is fantastic. If you get this with house pips or whatever, it's just going to be going crazy, especially if you get it in Ekwidon where you can sort of bounce cards. So we saw the, what was that one called? Now and Later. If you have this on the board, you now and later it, put it in your archive so it's not gumming up your hand, have it for later to go back into Geistoid and just have these really big turns where you're getting a lot of filtering done, you're playing a lot of cards. It's fantastic. 2 power, very, very balanced power for something doing this much good. Yeah, solid card by a solid player. Love it. By far, probably the best card in this deck, just on its own. All right, next one, we've got Techno Shade. This is one of our uncommons. Damater is that uncommon, so you're going to see it decent amount, but not like in every deck like you're going to see some of these commons. Techno Shade, 3 power, 1 armor. After fight, after reap, your opponent shuffles a random card from their hand into their deck. So we've seen other cards like this before, some of them in PV, like, what's that guy called? Not Bandit Culver, I don't know, there's a 3 power one, right? That shuffles a random card from your opponent's hand into their deck, or puts it, I think that's the one that puts it, maybe it puts it on top. But anyways, we saw a lot of effects similar to this last couple sets. This one is now just in Geistoid. It's after fight and after reap with that extra armor on there, so you can kind of get this a lot of different ways, but it's just disruption, right? You're putting a card from your opponent's hand into their deck, you're messing up their handcrafting. Not bad at all. Again, no play effect here, so it's got to survive, but it is a little bit more survivable, especially if you're putting one of those taunts on the board. Thoughtcatcher coming back. Again, we've got some capture synergy already. This one does have the capture pip on it, so there's 2 more capture enhances. Doesn't really synergize too much with the old switcheroo because you're giving your captured amber to your opponent, but that's never a bad thing. This is just maybe making your creatures more survivable until then because your opponent doesn't want to give it the extra draw, but never sad to see Thoughtcatcher. So again, I don't think, especially for Geistoid, I don't think this is the most representative of this house. We do have some commons that are hit or miss. Hammersmiths, iffy. Wraith Constructs, we'll see. Old Switcheroo, I think, is pretty solid. Uncommons, though, are looking a lot better for that house, just to kind of, give you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more power. Too many creatures again, though. We're not seeing those kind of power actions that we're used to seeing from Geistoid. So this one was one of the more disappointing ones. I kept saying, like, I have the Demotter, which is doing awesome stuff, but what am I drawing into that I really care about? We'll see. But again, if you can make a big board and your opponent doesn't have creature control, especially in sealed, it's not bad. And this one has some stuff that's going to help you keep your board alive, some bigger stuff, some damage that you're dealing, but all in all, not doing anything too impressive there. It's really just sort of play creatures and reap and hope they survive. All right, let's get into Unfathomable. This one there's some cool stuff in Unfathomable. I did pick Unfathomable as one of my houses for my custom deck. I believe I ended up picking Mars, of course, then the Alberos, and then Unfathomable, because I love Unfathomable Disruption. I'm excited for how they're going to synergize with all the exhaustion mechanics in this. I think they're going to be really, really interesting because they want your opponent's creatures to be exhausted. And so maybe they're going to punish a lot of the entrench stuff going on, but we'll see. Starting off here, though, we've got Figurific Rod making a comeback here. This is, again, really interesting. You're trying to think of, like, can I use this for my own entrench effects? And maybe your opponent, there's fringe scenarios where you can use this on your own creatures to turn on entrench effects. If it's the middle of your turn, you have a ready creature that has an entrench effect, but you're not in that house. You have the neighbors of it are in that house. You exhaust it with the Figurific Rod. Again, in a set where exhaustion is very, very important and kind of tactical, Figurific Rod, just a great common to have in that space. All right, we've got Hemogrith. This is the Seahorse. This will be your Bane in Sealed. Come on. 2 power play. If there are no enemy exhausted creatures, your opponent loses 2 amber. Again, this one being at common, you're going to see this a lot. Very, very good early game. Mid to late game, I found it to be really tough to actually get off because your opponent is just choosing to entrench a lot of their creatures. Most of the time, if you're playing against Unfathomable, if you have an entrench effect, I think you should always be entrenching at the end of the turn just to try and make it harder for these to get value. But losing 2 amber, getting bodies on the board is never bad. So again, this one being at common, I think is going to be, you're going to see this a lot just to try and slow your opponent down, get some bodies on the board. So again, thinking about how all of these exhaustion mechanics interact with your opponent, I think is going to be really, really fun for Sealed. We did end up with 2 of those. We got the power counter on one and then the draw on the other. Not bad at all. Key new, we got another play effect. So I know I said so far on creatures, I think we've had 0 play effects. We've got our second one here coming up. This is where a lot of these power counters are coming from. And then also those draw effects. This one enhanced into Ekwidon as well, but we got play. Choose an enemy creature with no power counters on it. Exhaust that creature and each of its neighbors. Fantastic creature control, even though it's just, buying you a turn maybe. If you're playing against other sets especially, this is something that's just turning those creatures off for a turn. But if your opponent has really good reap effects or whatever, there's lots of things. It's just great. Very big thing, again, to think about in Sealed. This has to be a creature with no power counters on it that's targeting. So if you have power counters, you want to kind of spread those out in a way that is going to make it hard for these to get value if you're playing against them in Sealed. This is also giving you those enhances as well. So I think it's fine. A 2 power creature that has the potential of turning off 3 creatures on your opponent's board for a turn. Very, very solid, and giving those enhances throughout the deck as well. Not bad. We got 2 of those coming out here. Again, smaller bodies, but maybe with some power counters, you can beef them up a little bit to get some survivability. All right, Paralysis sign-in. We've had Horrid sign-in before. I think there was another sign-in at one point, but this is going to be a 3 power after reap, stun, enrage, and exhaust a creature. So this is basically Echo Pearl without the Omni and without the single use. So this is going to be able to basically, if this gets on the board, just totally shut down some creatures for a couple turns, especially again if they're not the entrench abilities. This is very good for turning off some of those gigantics, which we might see, which have some really crazy effects. I did not pull one of those, but I've seen those floating around the discords. There's some cool stuff out there. So very, very solid creature control, targeted, but it's got to survive. Again, only 3 power. Probably need some of those power enhancements, or at least exhausting creatures to kind of make sure they're not able to fight this off the board. But not a bad effect on Reap. All right, Priestess Leilani. This is one of the ones, again, in sealed. I think Unfathomable is going to be a house you see a lot in sealed just because they have probably the most just sort of base utility that I've seen from the common creatures. This one is going to be 3 power. After Reap, exhaust an enemy creature. If you do, ready a non-priest creature. I mean, it's creature control. It lets you sort of chain into other stuff. So if you have sign-in on the board, you can Reap with it, and then Reap with this to ready and Reap with this again while you're exhausting more of your opponent's creatures. Leilani is just fantastic. It does have that text in there where you can't chain multiple Leilanis into one another to rule of 6. But yeah, I think this is solid. Again, sort of like we saw with the Hot Bunk. This can also be used to ready your opponent's entrench creatures if you need to. It says exhaust an enemy creature. If you do, ready a non-priest creature. So as long as that's not your opponent's Priestess Leilani, you could also ready it as well to turn off some of the entrench effects. So again, very, very versatile, good, solid sealed card for this Unfathomable creature pool. Got 2 of those in here. This one having the plus power and the capture pip on it. So again, Unfathomable so far, not bad. This is not crazy Archon stuff we're seeing, but in sealed, I would be pretty happy to see at least this house having this. I think if I had this and more actions in this part of the deck, I'd be feeling really good. But unfortunately, again, 26 creatures, it's hard to get traction, especially if your opponent has creature control. All right, Slapdash Enamel. This is a common artifact, so be prepared to see this a decent amount. When I first read it, I was just like, oh no, they made Wretched Doll Part 2, and it's not much better, but after reading it a little bit more and getting a little bit farther, it is actually a little bit better. So at the start of your turn, destroy each card with a corrosion counter on it. Action, put a corrosion counter on a card in play. So while you can't chain 2 of these to destroy something in one turn like you could with Wretched Doll, this one takes less turns to really, like as a singleton, it takes less turns to actually destroy something because it will be destroyed at the start of your next turn, as long as Slapdash Enamel doesn't get blown up. And this can target anything. So it's not just creatures. You can also target... oh, that's very interesting. So it can target artifacts, but the wording on this is just a card in play. So I wonder if you can even destroy upgrades with this. I hadn't even thought about that until just now, but that wording, I'd have to look up, but I think you might actually be able to destroy upgrades with this too, which is crazy. And very timely because I opened what was it? A Nautilus package, Amber Skies deck with DDoS, and like I just love playing that combo. Like you get your Voltron made, and this would be able to just totally start shutting that down by destroying those upgrades. So very, very interesting card. Again, that's a common, so you're going to see that a lot. Be prepared for some common artifact control in Unfathomable with things like that. And again, if you have multiple of these, you're just destroying multiple things a turn as long as these stay on the board. They are action though instead of Omni. Again, it's pretty slow. You have to do Unfathomable multiple times. If you have your priestesses down, if you're doing your exhausting and paralyzing and stuff, you might be able to survive, but as soon as they play like a board clear or whatever, you might be toast. Speaking of board clears, first one that we've seen in this deck, and it will be our last one as well, we've got Tsunami. So this is at uncommon. Amber Pip on their play, deal 4 damage to each ready creature. So again, this is very, very interesting in how you can sequence this, because you could have a board of Unfathomable, Reap with all of them, use your priestesses to actually ready more of your opponent's creatures. Your whole board is exhausted. play this, basically do a one-sided board wipe. Oftentimes you're going to have a mix of like your other creatures and stuff in there as well. Your opponent's going to have some exhausted creatures because they're doing their entrenches and stuff. But this is one of those ones that, again, you'll see fairly often, and it's just a decent card in the set, doing 4 damage to everything. We did have a few creatures with armor or some 5 power stuff, but from what you've seen so far, at least in my deck, this is killing almost everything, every card we've seen in my deck at least. So have to be careful when I play this, but don't mind seeing it. It is at uncommon, so I'd love to see this. Honestly, I'd probably love to see this at common for sealed play, but maybe that'd be too good with the Amber Pip on there. But considering, again, this is the only board clear, the only the only thing that destroys as far as effects, aside from some reap effects we saw in my entire deck so far. So a little rough to just have one of those at uncommon. All right, Under Pressure coming back. This creature cannot ready. Again, when you've got entrench effects and stuff, entrench allows you to just keep your creature exhausted anyways. So I'm not quite sure how you're supposed to use this. But it maybe can make it so that your opponent can't use some of these effects to ready them themselves, so to ensure you're getting some of those good entrench effects. But it's an interesting one. If there's good fight effects, good reap effects or whatever, it's still very solid to put it on there just to make sure they're not using it multiple times, especially with something like Priestess Leilani that can ready a creature more than once. And then we've got Thalassophobia. Again, we saw in our Geistoid, I don't think there was a single card that oh man, that sunlight is rough. I don't think there was a single card that mentioned Haunted. So all of this extra discard and stuff, and we haven't really seen anything that's doing like purging from discard. We haven't seen stuff that's looking for cards in the discard. So I'm not exactly sure if this set is going to interact with the discard hardly at all. And that's maybe just something I haven't seen too much of yet, but it makes cards like Thalassophobia or like our Geistoid card that mills the top 6. What was that one again? Haunting Measures. I'm not quite sure what their role is in this set compared to, you know, like Amber Skies or Grim Reminders, where we do have the haunted mechanic that kind of, and a lot of recursion that are going to make what's in your discard a lot more interesting. This to me just kind of feels like maybe your opponent has things that can stack the top of their deck, but I haven't seen a whole lot of that. There might be some unfathomable cards that put things on top of the deck. We've seen that before, like Bubbles or Maelstrom or things like that. I can't remember if I saw any of those in the set or not, but Thalassophobia combos a lot better with those in this deck. It literally has really no synergy, right? And you can't hit yourself with it either, so you're not helping yourself flip the deck faster. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting one to have included in the set. I would love to see something like, and again, there might be a lot of other rares I haven't seen, but something like Corrode feels really good, where you kind of at least have that targeted destroy or whatever. But there you go. That is my Draconian Measures deck. Again, did not feel amazing to play. Way too many creatures, not enough sort of bigger plays. There was a lot of incremental stuff going on though, like Hemogryst removing 2 Amber, all these capture pips. I think we have 4 capture pips, and then especially the Ekwidon with those house pips as well, really is what, if I got close to winning, which I don't think I actually won a game, but if I got close to winning, it was really because I was able to get all of this steal going on with the Ekwidon, and then some disruption with some of these bounce cards and stuff. So, you know, not bad, but compared to what I saw from some other decks, Shadows stealing just makes mine look kind of pitiful. The Mars stuff, I think there's some really interesting sort of card draw in there. Dragons had some interesting stuff. Dragons I've seen kind of mixed reviews on so far, but you know, we'll see. I am not, oh, don't want to show that because these are not scannable yet. I'm not passing judgment on the set yet. I have not seen anything that makes me think it's going to be strong enough to compete with PV. That's just my honest opinion. I do think there's a pretty good chance for Sealed Alliance especially to be really, really fun with this set, because there are so many of those little interactions. And then there's a lot of things where if you're overwhelmed, so your opponent kind of has maybe a little bit of a lead on you on board presence or whatever, you have some ways to kind of get some catch-up mechanics and stuff. But I kind of know what houses I might be avoiding in Sealed. Not that you have too much choice, but Geistoid so far, not super impressive. Unfathomable, I think, looks pretty darn good in Sealed, just with sort of the scariness of the creatures and stuff. Some of the synergy there. And then Ekwidon, I like the action, so if you get an action-heavy pot especially, there's some really cool stuff. But yeah, we'll see. I'm still excited for the Game Found to come out. I think the House Pips always make things really interesting. The Gigantics I've seen, the Unfathomable Gigantic looks insane. The Geistoid one, I think, too, is pretty cool. So excited to try that. But that has been my Draconian Measures deck that I opened. Again, they only did one deck at a time, or one deck per player this year instead of the 3 we got for GR. But maybe there's not quite along as on printing this time. But tell me what you think. Think in the comments. I have a good idea of what some people are going to think, that it's looking pretty weak compared to what we saw in PV, but in one sense, I think I've said this before, I don't really mind a set that is weaker than PV as long as its sealed play especially is fun and has lots of decisions and things like that, but also not going to time all the time. So I think this set has the potential to be there. My deck did not quite feel that way, but I think my deck is an outlier because of the amount of creatures in it. The house composition maybe kind of affects that a little bit. So excited to see more. We'll be doing live deck opening once the Game Found gets in a couple months here, so be on the lookout for that and for other stuff from Phlox'em. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for hanging out and watching. We'll see you next time on Phlox'em and in the Crucible. Bye.